Being a Christian woman and walking in God's calling for our lives can be a difficult task. With the world and pop culture telling us to be one way, and the Bible saying another, you kind of end up feeling like an other. Well, you're not alone. Join me now and my friends as we navigate life in our 20s and 30s, while making sure we live out our faith, embrace our femininity, and looking cute. We discuss pop culture, life, careers, relationships, and so much more. Prepare to be entertained and educated. I know you're going to love it. Join our movement and embrace being another girl. The views expressed on this podcast are our own and do not reflect our employers. Enjoy. Hello, everyone. You are listening to Those Are the Girls with Mallory and Friends. I'm Mallory, and we are changing culture and bringing back traditional values. I'm so excited to have Gabriella on the podcast today. We met because one of my friends tagged her in a post, and we chit-chatted about it a little bit, about like women and working and conservatism and blah, blah, blah. And then I was like, you know what? We should definitely have a conversation on the podcast. And I started following her, and she does a lot of like really cool things for the movement, the conservative movement specifically. So I'm just really excited to have her on. And just for this conversation, this is going to be a little bit more political conversation. So go ahead and give us the 5 stars. I know you're thinking about it. Go ahead and give it to us now and leave a review and tell us how great you thought the episode was. Even though it's the beginning, I just know you'll love it. Anyway, Gabriella, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Thanks, Mallory, for having me on. And yes, better late than never to connect. And Frances is a gem, so I'm very happy that she connected us and put us in touch with one another to speak virtually. But kind of the long story short, because I don't want to be long-winded or bore your listeners, and I think research is always a good idea for people to explore and, to decide for themselves if they like what I say and my work, or if they're curious about my work. But I've been many roles in the conservative movement. I've been an activist on my college campus. I've worked for the Leadership Institute. I've been a freelance journalist, still am a freelance journalist, policy analyst, podcaster, so many different titles across working in politics, and even crossing over to different industries that are adjacent to conservative politics, but don't necessarily entail politics overtly, but politics does affect those industries. So I think, gosh, now I'm 33. I got really involved when I was 18. So gosh, I guess this is going to be my 15th year of working, being involved in conservative politics directly, indirectly. And I guess I've seen, a lot in my time, and a change in a decade. A lot can change in a decade in terms of conservatism, youth activism. I mean, just the proliferation of social media. Like when I was in college and before that in high school, Facebook and Twitter were just coming out, and YouTube was the thing too. Now there's ones like Instagram is now big, TikTok, which I have mixed opinions about. I think a lot of people do. I mean, you have all these different...
We'll get into it.
Sure. I mean, I have some friends who use it, and I understand why and all that. Personally, I don't want to use it just for different reasons, but I know some people who've benefited. But like, I mean, even listing off the big ones, I mean, there's even like smaller, obscure ones. I think Snapchat is still a thing and all that. So media has changed a lot with like, people who are millennial like me versus Gen Z, and how they use social media and different apps. Like I know they forego Facebook a lot of the times, although I saw something recently that said that Gen Z is now gravitating back towards Facebook with the poke feature. I was like, I need to see proof of this. This makes no sense to me.
Yeah, I don't believe that.
There was always like, there were things that I wish I would have had when I was starting out my career in the conservative movement, a better support system, more groups to be out there, because you were really kind of like a lone wolf. Even when I was in college between 2009, 2012, I worked with Young America's Foundation. I was an intern with them and had a YAF chapter before the two YAFs merged again. So it was kind of in that limbo phase, and then, had an internship as a result of hosting a speaker whose exchange with a girl. And every year this clip gets recirculated and actually it really relates to the time, with all these anti-Semitism, instances and anti-Israel protests. This clip of a girl who confronted my guest speaker at the time, David Horowitz, who has spoken with YAF. I don't know if he still speaks on their circuit. He's a little older now. He's like in his 80s, maybe closer to 90. But yeah, that clip is so timely, and that hatred hasn't changed. Now it's just like metastasized. And so, seeing how activism was when I was there, you weren't getting canceled, you weren't getting ostracized so much. Like I had people write me nasty stuff, like claim I was doing these things, online anonymous trolls. That happens. Now it's a lot worse. So I don't envy the kids today in college. I feel very actually terrified for them about what they're dealing with as a conservative student. But I think even with the trials and tribulations or some of the, bias or the hostility you may face, I think in the greater scheme of things, it should make you a stronger person. Like for me, any adversity, whether it was political adversity or, didn't get an opportunity, I think that makes you stronger. And I hope the kids, even though they're having to endure kind of like a pressure cooker environment in the universities today, it's unrecognizable. Like there was still a semblance of normalcy at the time, when I was going to college.
But now, I feel the same way too.
Yeah.
When I was in college, I feel like it was not this bad. It was not pleasant all the time, but definitely not this bad.
Yeah. No, and I went to school in California, so it may be very different from your experience. I think Southern universities, what everyone is saying, like that's where people want to send their kids in the future, like state schools and red states where the faculty administrators like do actually still care about an education. There's of course going to be some bias, but they still have to act together a little bit more in the Southern.
Well, so I actually did my undergrad in New Jersey. I went to Seton Hall in New Jersey. Yes. I came back down south because that's, where I belong, but I did do my time up north. So yeah, it wasn't as bad as California, I will say. New Jersey has its issues, but
interesting.
I don't think it's as, yeah. I mean, the biggest thing, so while I was in New Jersey, I feel like it wasn't as blatant because I graduated in 2018. I do remember when the Students for Life, they put up the posters of I think of aborted fetuses. And I remember there was like a big thing about like, should we have this? Should we not? And I do think there's a conversation about that. And then when we went to the March for Life, someone was pulling down our posters. And that was, to me, that was like the biggest scandal. Like, oh my gosh, they pulled down our posters. But now, I mean, people are like punching people. So it's like not even like but in the South, my friends, I feel like did not really have all that. It wasn't that bad.
Yeah, I mean, depending upon the school, like I saw that there were crazy protests at Emory University, and
I did see that. That was random.
Yeah, although UNC in Chapel Hill has gotten rid of their DEI program, so like some of these institutions, which are almost like Ivy League level, I think they're actually maybe a little better because they still value, education and free thought and discussion, and I wouldn't totally knock, everyone at the Ivy Leagues because, as you were saying, as I was kind of mentioning, when I worked for a leadership institute, I used to travel to the Northeast. I met with phenomenal students. I went to Seton Hall or University, and I don't know if probably past your time because I was done with student activism by 2016. So I had crossover, but your campus was the one by the beach, by the coast, right?
No,
maybe not. Another.
There is a Seton Hill. I don't know. Seton Hill might be by a beach or a coast.
Maybe it was College of New Jersey or one of those other schools closer to New York. I can't recall. But there was one university. But I went to a lot of universities, so I may not remember exactly what Seton Hall looks like. But I feel like I went there or I talked to students there. Like I went.
You probably did.
Yeah, I probably did at some point. But they all look kind of similar. Not all the campuses, but some of them do look a little similar. Like Rutgers sometimes can be indistinguishable from some of the others because the architecture is, it's interesting. But it's all universities kind of look similar. It doesn't matter what state you go to. And then a little familiar. But back to the whole like Greater Northeast thing. Like it wasn't entirely a lost area. I hope it does one positive, I would say, impact from this, like inspires like a new generation of activists, whether they're conservative or pro-Israel, and really force the students to push back, in a intellectual way and to try to engage in free speech and not cower in fear. So I'm hoping, with all this tussling and this, negative direction that we're seeing universities go into, it has like a natural pushback to this.
I agree. I kind of want to piggyback off of what you said on that. I have really been a little saddened, I guess, by a lot of conservatives, a lot of people who are supposedly on our side are very much don't go to college at all, forego all of this. And I really think that a lot of this cowering, because that's kind of what it is, you're allowing them to push you out. I think a lot of that is going to be to our detriment. I think when I think about telling, I mean, especially in women, you know, but we can get into a little bit later, but I think especially telling women like, no, don't go to college. Then who are the nurses that are going to be at the pregnancy centers? You know, to be a nurse, to be able to do an ultrasound machine, you need to have the qualifications and you need to go to school for that. And specifically, I'm just pregnancy centers, just the first thing that came to my mind, that I do think women should be working there. Sure, I think a man can work there, but realistically, I think we should have more women working there. So like, who's going to do something as simple as that though? So I think that like, we should be using this opportunity. We see what's going on. I think clubs are so important. Join your local two clubs I really like and support are Young Women for America and the New Enlightened Women for sure. Join those chapters, make good solid friends there so you guys can stand up together so you don't feel so alone. And if you don't have one, try to create one. But I do think it's really important for us to not like run away from universities, because I mean, even thinking about when you go to the doctor, like my mom always says, and she's been saying this before I could even get pregnant, but she would always be like, make sure when you're pregnant, you have a doctor that is a pro-life doctor, and there's a Christian pro-life doctor, and there's different ways you can do that. But, you know, if all of us conservative Christian pro-lifers are saying no more to school, no more to college, I mean, who's going to be working at these institutions? We still need to be there. And I think also just anyone listening, if you're feeling discouraged, especially women, because, you know, you're hearing that if you go for your career, you're never going to get married. I just want to encourage you, like, make sure you're doing what God has told you to do. If God has told you to become a doctor, then heck, you can meet him I was going to say doctor school, in med school. He could be the guy you sit next to, and because you decided not to follow what God has called you to do, now you're sitting at home wondering where your husband is. I think it's just so important for us to make sure we're not making decisions based on what other people say, but we're making decisions based on like what God has called us to do. And we need you. We need pro-life doctors. We need pro-life lawyers. I mean, we need pro-lifers everywhere. We need conservatives everywhere in every institution that runs the government, that runs the justice, like that's in Congress. We need people like that. But anyway, that's just my tangent. Gabriella, what were you saying?
No, I can respond to that absolutely. I think you can create, I wouldn't say entirely withdrawing from mainstream, let's say, industries or sectors is a wise idea, because we are part of the United States and we should absolutely have some say and play and influence over institutions and industries.
Mm-hmm.
To entirely withdraw is not healthy. And that creates, how would you call it, like balkanization. And, you know, the left engages in this often, pitting people against each other on different, you know, immutable characteristics. And we sometimes see this on the right, too, where they say, like, don't engage with anyone who has any slight difference in opinion with you. And I think we risk suffering when we aren't aware of what happens in mainstream places, or let's say, you know, the status quo or things of that sort. That doesn't mean you're going to become liberal. Like, I actually came away, I don't like to use the term to describe the left as liberal, because I view liberal as like classical liberalism, which is limited government, all this. I view them as progressive more so, and I think our side sometimes makes the mistakes in saying that they're liberal, but classically speaking, they're not. They're progressive or far left or left of center. It's kind of a more appropriate thing. But I mean, in certain cases, like, you could create like some semblance of a parallel economy where you can have brands that compete with, let's say, some brands that may be into CRT, DEI, ESG,
Mm-hmm,
or
mm-hmm.
very far to the left brands. I think there is a diaper company now. It's crazy to think that a diaper company could be political. All the mainstream diaper companies, or like, I can't even think what else. I mean, there's so many examples.
Makeup, jewelry.
Yeah, makeup, jewelry, you know, I entirely abandon every single company. It's really hard to do that because, you know, I live in the city. I can't entirely replace, you know, all my stuff with products. It's just hard to do that, you know, and it doesn't mean I'm betraying my values. I'm definitely not doing anything or supporting any businesses that are overtly political. They made one simple mistake, you know, and maybe reassess their opinions and things. Great. But I think there is an appropriate place for some parallel aspects of the economy, like anything that is overtly, tilted, radical feminist, whatever. Great. I think
Mm-hmm.
conservatives can engage there. But in terms of withdrawing from society, that would not be wise. And I mean, increasingly across the political spectrum, we see people say, I just saw an article this week, I think from the New York Times or Washington Post, not a friendly source, saying that there's an increase in Gen Z years who are going into vocational trades and like celebrating it positively. So not everyone's path is going to be college. I chose it because I did very well academically, and at the time when I went to college, 2009, 2012, there was still this insistence that you had to have a degree at some good university. And my school at the time was really high ranked, like within the top 100, one of the best public schools, UC San Diego at the time. It's diminished a little bit. Not surprised it happens. With the natural progression of things, there's certain schools improve, rightfully so, but mine I feel like has gone in a downward decline. I don't like the leadership in charge of there. But at a time like for millennials, for us, like we were told we had to go to college.
Yeah.
Negative effect where I wouldn't say we're too overeducated, but where you too many people going to college and there's a skills gap, where your needs can be better attuned and fielded through professions where you're going to make more money. You're not going to be saddled with death. You don't have to study like underwater basket weaving or something obscure like that, just because someone is telling you just have to check off having a degree. And now I think because vocational trades are starting to be normalized again, we notice that there's a skills deficit gap, and we need people to fill those positions. It's a noble profession to work with your hands. A lot of people, women and men, they can easily do it, depending upon their comfort level, where they live, the industries in their neighborhoods, localities, states, etc., regions. And there will still be a need for college, but I think people are going to reassess: do I go to college am I just subsidizing leftist activism, or am I actually going to learn something? That's where I think I was mentioning earlier that I think we're going to see a shift to good state schools that are prioritizing academic rigor. Probably people, if they're conservative leaning, they're going to look to schools like Hillsdale, Grove City College, so many other schools that could fulfill the need, offer that liberal arts education without the indoctrination. And then people are going to forgo going to these bigger Ivy League schools or the UC system out west, or some of these other big state schools where it's just propaganda and extreme agendas, especially tilted to the left. So parents are going to be more judicious with their money. I mean, cost of tuition is going up ridiculously.
It's crazy.
Because government has gotten more involved, so naturally, of course, the cost of tuition goes up. Not surprising whenever government interferes with student loans or that type, any area. My focus typically these days is energy and conservation, but I know just observing cultural trends and education trends, education has become more expensive. Your return on investment has diminished, and people are reevaluating if their degrees are entirely worthy and worth something. So, and there's not the stigma anywhere that you have to have a college degree to get a job. I think even some of the biggest employers have now said, we're going to hire people based on talent. We don't necessarily care if they have a degree. They have to show a willingness, a promise, talent, agreeability, good team workplace, collaborative spirit environment, but still can be independent, go-getter, innovative, creative, things of that sort. So I'm encouraged that, on the one hand, we see where universities are going, but there are alternatives. But there is still going to be a need for highly specialized, education. To be a doctor, a lawyer, something highly skilled, airplane pilot. It may not be a setting, but you're going to have to get formal, flying school training. Typically, the military has done this. I mean, they have their own share of problems from what my friends who have served or who are currently serving have said. So every sector seems to be dealing with, hyperpolitization, which strays from their mission statement. And people are going to recognize, okay, we don't have a stable workforce because we were focusing on these aspects over training people, focusing on merit, doing this. So
and
a lot to work. But no, I don't think conservatives should shy away from being in the mainstream. If we want to reach our ideas to more people, you have to engage with people who don't agree with you, and you could wherever comfortable and appropriate, because you're not going to be able to penetrate every single situation, every single event or opportunity. Like there's certain places, outlets I just don't talk to when I'm doing interviews or things. They wouldn't reach out to me. I mean, maybe I would be open to reaching out to them, but you wouldn't find a lot of, open-mindedness with certain people, and you can stay away from them, but people who kind of like gravitate towards the middle, maybe a little center left, who are open-minded, you have some commonality, something you could perhaps spark a conversation there. And I feel like there's this kind of like radical middle that has emerged with, what is it, the Free Press, that one publication, and some other outlets like that, where you have formerly left-wing people who've kind of come home a little bit more moderate. They are friendly with Republicans and conservatives now. um Several, I can't, exactly off the top of my head, but there are a lot of people who come to mind, who kind of fit in that middle, who feel like they can work with conservatives and Republicans because we like free speech, we support free speech, and they see that their fellow travelers of the left have abandoned those principles. And so I think there are opportunities. It's a matter of seizing them, but I think retreating and hiding away and complaining about it on Twitter or X is not healthy.
Yeah, I agree. I think when there was something you said that I wanted to piggyback off of. What was it? I should have written it down. Oh, about things being overly politicized. I think that is probably the biggest problem that we have right now in any capacity of anything that we do, is everything has become politicized.
Right.
And for some people, I like to think that like I can have a political conversation with someone and then walk away and still be friends. Like I like to think that about myself. And I think I've proven that. I have friends on both sides. But the reality is like most people can't do that. And a lot of things politics have become so much more personal. And as someone who like, I grew up very interested in politics. I actually like, not to brag, was voted most likely to be a politician in high school.
Nice.
So I have been like interested in politics like for a really long time. So I want to say like before the Trump era, and I hate like making him the metric for everything, but I guess that's just where we are in the world right now. So before the Trump era, I feel like it was just people weren't as like sensitive about politics. You could have a conversation about politics and it was just kind of like, oh yeah, this is what I believe in, and you can move on. And I think now, just because of Trump, but also 2020, when we were all, no one left their house and all you could do is just sit there and watch videos all day of people like agreeing with you, and then you see another video, and then by the end, now you're super radicalized. So I think because of that, like it's really changed for like everything is now political. And I think that I think a lot of people have recognized that and are kind of wanting to get away from that. So the more schools, like you said, that are just kind of like, we're just here to educate you, and these are the facts, you can decide whether you believe it or not. The more schools we see like that, I think we'll see more of. And like even like businesses, the more businesses we see that like won't post a black square, or won't post a Christian flag, just, or rainbows or anything like that. They'll just be like, perfect example, like the diapers. I don't necessarily think your diapers should have an opinion on like pride, or have an opinion on like DEI even. I think your diapers should just be good quality. Like, and right. And like, I personally would like my diapers to be pro-life, but I also wouldn't mind if I didn't know, like it wouldn't hurt me to not know.
Sure.
I would prefer that, obviously, pro-life, but like, so anyway, my point is though, I think the more people are kind of realizing like, okay, like it's starting to get weird now, everything is politicized. I think people are going to gravitate more to just people who are just like, I just want my coffee to be coffee. I don't want to lessen with it. I don't want to have to support anything with it. I just want to drink my coffee. So yeah, when you said that about that's what it made me think of. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Because I study a lot on environmental social governance, which is a branch of DEI, CRT, kind of this Marxist matrix of ideas, and they're trying to package Marxism in a sense and these kind of far left platitudes into, for ESG, they say it's like a market-based, thinking, where corporations are deciding that, it's better to put political ideas ahead of making and maximizing profits. And they have to see poor return on investment with that philosophy. And you even see some of the biggest ESG proponents, like a BlackRock or State Street or Vanguard, they have started to pivot away from this. And now they want to call, instead of like ESG investing, they call it transition investing, like transition from fossil fuels to net zero, which is never going to be achieved. Carbon is an essential element of life. Fossil fuels are still heavily used in this country, and without them, we would be extremely impoverished. And there's no discussion about, nuclear or geothermal or hydropower, which are the true clean energy sources, which could be supplements. Nuclear maybe could be a replacement down the road, if regulations didn't hold it back, of course. But I have seen, like, in the corporate space, like even Starbucks, like a lot of these companies, because conservative shareholders, people are starting to become shareholders on the center right. So they're not going into boardrooms and they're voting as shareholders against far left measures, whether it's, socially liberal measures or economically liberal measures where, there's the conservatives and center right people are now more empowered to go to the boardroom and say, hey, as a dedicated shareholder, I think this is wrong. I think this is going to steer the company, the corporation, in a very bad direction. Let's avoid it. So now I've seen recently with related to like far left climate directives. And I think in Starbucks, they were trying to push in one of their stakeholder meetings, to like abandon milk for like oat milk or vegan milk at the insistence of data. And even the stakeholders there were like, yeah, no, we're not going to do that. Like, most of our customers drink milk, whole milk or milk, or, real milk, not fake milk, imitation milk. And so we do start to see even historically kind of progressive leaning or progressive leadership at these corporations start to pivot kind of in a more neutral direction. And that's not a bad thing, because there's nothing wrong to make a profit. And like you said, people are just so exhausted by everything being political. And I think I had mistakenly wished in college, I was like, I wish people were more political. Now I can out the bottom, but I'm not wholly responsible for that. But I kind of people wanted to care. I didn't want it to be like metastasized or
like this,
where it's like people are political and don't make that part of their identity, which I don't think is healthy. Like, people know me as a conservative. Like, I'm unashamedly conservative, but I can carry a conversation about stuff outside of politics and different topics. And I think many of us who are conservative can absolutely do that. And I think the left does it, where politics is part of their identity. We see this on the right too with a lot of these influencers these days. Mm-hmm. They can't disassociate politics from their lifestyle, and it becomes a problem. And then they don't understand what conservatism is. They're like, okay, it's an identity I can latch onto, make money off of, grift off of, even, there's that instance as well. And conservatism is a lifestyle. It's not just a thing you temporarily embrace. And we were talking before recording. I'm happy to dive into this too about conservatism.
I was going to say, can you tell us really quick? Actually, sorry, before you do that, can you lay out definition of Marxism for people who, because like I feel like we hear that word all the time, but can you maybe just give a definition of it and then go into conservatism?
Yeah, so Marxism derives from Karl Marx, who was one of the thought leaders with Frederick Engels, and this was at the 1800s, mid 1800s. And they wrote, Karl Marx specifically, he wrote many things, but specifically at the time, I wouldn't say it was groundbreaking, because I don't agree with the Communist Manifesto.
Right.
I dislike it. I think it inspired, a lot of horrible stuff, including policies that led to the imprisonment of my family members, my grandpa in particular. Lots of other family members being displaced, or family friends, being killed or displaced in the Soviet Union. And so, it was a very popular book at the time. People were reading it, and it went against the grain of free enterprise or capitalism that was emerging and on the scene. And they're saying, like, there's capitalism so excessive, it's exploitative, it's bad, it's terrible. So Marxian ideas derive from Karl Marx, who wrote this book, The Communist Manifesto. And he wrote specifically about economics, but there have been others, I would say his ideological successors. There's Herbert Marcuse, a couple others who are cultural Marxists. So it's not just isolated to economics, and whether do you want centrally planned policies that invite government to be intrusive in economic decisions, controlling most businesses, depriving your freedoms. You also have this Marxist element in cultural issues, which is known as cultural Marxism, or today conveniently known as wokeism. Wokeism has tinges of cultural Marxism, but it stems from Herbert Marcuse, who actually, funny enough, apparently taught at my university well before my time.
Oh.
I didn't know that, but he was there, and I was like, oh my gosh, no, I didn't want to learn this. But what we see in terms of like this hierarchy of oppression and all these other very loaded terms and you know, all that type of stuff, that derives from cultural Marxism, or kind of this social cultural Marxist interpretation, an extension of progressivism, but at its real extreme, cultural Marxism. And so it talks about resentment from kind of like the socio-cultural angle versus economics, but they also dislike the free markets too, and they want to dismantle the free enterprise system wherever they can. But this was able to be transferred to like ideas about women's empowerment. The more extreme waves of feminism, not the first wave, which was about, you know, getting women the right to vote and making sure we have equal standing under the law.
We can own property, have a car, things like that. Yeah.
So you see Marxism kind of translate to like radical feminism. In environmentalism, you see the same kind of Marxian platitudes there. You've seen this in topics about abortion. You see this about in immigration, Marxism, like all this type of stuff. You know, it can be found in every topic. Healthcare, they talk about, you know, central healthcare, you know, socialized medicine under this Marxian, you know, umbrella. And so you can find it like anywhere you see like these, or anti-Israelism, or like questioning of America's place in the world as the number one country, typically superpower. I see a lot of Marxist tinges there. So it derives from the cultural Marxism, you know, which derives from Karl Marx, of course. So but slightly different people at the forefront of that. And these ideas have carried on even today, which is crazy. But now they're more mainstreamed, and certain polling had come out that said that a lot of young people, not surprisingly, tend to lean more socialist. They're self-proclaimed socialists or communists even. They don't know what communism is or socialism is, and that makes me daughter of, you know, immigrants who came from the Soviet Union, you know, who fled and escaped that horrid system. And then having grandparents who had seen even the true horrors, because my parents grew up in post-Stalin occupied Lithuania, which was still not a pretty place because it was still very, you know, top-down, centrally planned as a society, but they didn't have people necessarily being sent over into the death camps as much, you know, into concentration camps or to the gulags and what have you. But you still had no freedoms. You couldn't contest or protest the government, question, you know, policies, et cetera, et cetera. And where were we going with that? Sorry, I lost my train of thought.
I was just asking like for you to kind of explain what Marxism is.
No.
Yeah.
So you can finish there.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to like get that definition because you said that earlier, and sometimes I feel like we hear that word and we're like, as conservatives, especially because I'll say my target age or the main listeners are like 18 to like 28ish, and I feel like we've heard this word so many times, but like we say they don't know, but do we even know like what exactly is Marxism? So I appreciate you like kind of like clarifying what that is and how it's kind of gotten into our culture and everything.
For sure. Yeah, and it's spiraled into like this web, you know, tentacles of all these different topics and areas, you know, higher education, housing development, environmentalism, feminism, immigration, all these topics. Like there is a kind of common thread, you know, on the far left of deriving it from Marxism. You read the texts, you read books, it all stems from there. It's all interconnected. It doesn't come by accident, of course. So I think that's what I was going with it. But what I was mentioning when I lost my train of thought was the polling suggests that the universities are inculcating young people with Marxism or far left platitudes or ideas. And that shows when they say, I support socialism or communism over free enterprise and limited government. And you're thinking, if these kids grew up in conservative homes and then they come out more far to the left, what is going on? You know, so it has there. What's that common denominator? What's that missing factor, missing piece? And it's the schooling system. And this could even be transpiring in secondary schools and high schools too. We see the inculcating of far left views even starting in elementary school, which would have been unfathomable. You know, I remember being in kindergarten and elementary school. We didn't have politics. Like things were so wholesome for when I went to grade school. And now to think that kids as young as 5 or younger even will have to worry about, these complex topics, and they're not even really out of diapers for that long, like they're just
Yeah.
for a few years, like they still don't have their brains are not fully developed, like, and you're overwhelming these kids who are learning how to be functioning, aspiring adults, to learn about stuff that people shouldn't be learning about until they're old enough to,
Yeah.
rabbit,
And I think
and all that type of stuff. It's just like it's starting very early, and if you read the work of like Horace Mann, who was a progressive education reformer, that's what he called himself, and school choice advocate Corey DeAngelis had written about him recently in one of his more recent books, and he talked about these progressive schools, like of the German style, predating Hitler's occupation of Germany, but this kind of progressive schooling where it was like very much like get the parents out of the classroom, make it top down policies. The teachers are the authority figures you look to. So this doesn't stem from random places. This comes from other countries. This comes from, philosophers who may have very questionable opinions or extreme opinions. So this stuff is not by accident. Like it's readily available in different textbooks. Like I said, Horace Mann. That's where the problems of schooling comes from. Him and his other associates in that kind of vein of thinking of education reform. And so the same with all, why you see a lot of far left platitudes at universities, creeping into the boardrooms, all these different topic areas. So they all have like an interconnectedness. And I'm not spewing this out of thin air. This is not conspiratorial. I'm a pretty well-read person. I've researched a lot too. I pride myself in being very well researched. So I could point you to a book. I could point you, to serious books written by serious people, and even to the sources themselves who openly say this. This is not something, contrived that I'm inventing. But you take it straight from the horse's mouth, metaphorically speaking, and you can say like, this is what they believe, this is what they said, take it or leave it. I'm just sharing this information with you, and this is how you have to know the connection.
This is so good. Sorry, just like a side note to what you're talking about, I really enjoy, first of all, you're very intelligent. You have done your research. I really like, you should have the number one podcast. Like, because I just some, like, this is such good information. And I also explaining it so that we're like, I'm not really into politics, but I do want to know a little bit. And I think that's something that we are really struggling with on the right, which is why I want you to talk about conservatism in a second. But one thing we're really struggling with, and I want to try to help fix, is that we are not getting out to people who are probably sympathetic to our message, who probably agree with us. We're not getting the information out to them because there's so many other barriers, because, there's someone, we don't have to get into it, but like, there's someone, just conversations is just so important. I really appreciate you kind of breaking it down. So really quick now, could you kind of explain what exactly is conservatism? When someone says they're a conservative, what exactly does that entail? Because I feel like there's so many, just like how Marxism is thrown out. I think we kind of say, well, I'm a conservative. And then, sometimes you'll look at someone or you'll ask someone what their beliefs are. And sometimes they'll be the exact opposite of really what conservative is, but they really, like capitalism. Or it'll be someone who's like, I'm not a conservative. And then you ask them some questions and you're like, actually, you are a conservative. So can you tell us a little bit about what is a conservative?
Yeah. Yeah, I think conservatism to me and how I've understood it from a young age is it's a socio-political economic thinking, but it's also
Right.
a lifestyle, how you live out your lifestyle as a conservative. If you live out your lifestyle as a conservative, you could be fairly religious, you like free markets, you really believe in the power of the individual. And it's not really narrowed down to exactly like one solid definition, but there are several key elements, one, because I think when American conservatism was forging its identity, it really didn't manifest until you had William F. Buckley, the National Review, to kind of really bring all the different factions and define what conservatism is. It wasn't until like the 40s or 50s, 1940s or 50s, where you really had like a semblance of conservatism, a really well thought out vision of what conservative is, because for the longest time, Republicans, even avowed ones, were pretty progressive on a lot of issues. So there wasn't really a distinction between some of these, philosophies. So it took, William F. Buckley and Barry Goldwater, Ronald Reagan, and a lot of other luminaries to kind of come together and define or elaborate on what conservatism is. And one such thinking, I still think it applies today. I know some people shrug at this notion, but I still think we can still view conservatism as a three-legged stool. And it means, strong family, strong national defense, and, limited government, free market economics. And sometimes you're not going to fulfill every pendulum or every peg on that stool, but you may have, maybe 80% or 85 or 90% in agreement with the three-legged stool. Or maybe someone may come in only believing in one, but maybe they'll gradually move towards the two other ones too. So it was a way to bring together different factions, to have some sort of a movement, which led to Reagan's election, for instance, him winning twice, when it was pretty divisive, or you had, progressive Republicans who still wanted to vote Republican, and then you had obviously social conservatives who were starting to gain steam, and how to bring those two together, so they were pretty creative in this fusionist thinking, which I know some people on the new right balk at, but I still think fusionism is important. You need it to win elections. You need to have a cohesive ideology. But at the same time, it's also a lifestyle. It's not just a political party, because conservative is different from Republican. Republican is a political party. It's malleable. Sometimes you get not as conservative Republicans who are identifying as Republicans. It's a big tent, political party. Same with the Democrats, historically speaking, but now they're not so increasingly big tent. They're very, one-way thinking, especially in this day and age. But conservatism is different from Republican, and there's a lot of overlap with that. But again, they're not entirely, they're not dissimilar, but they're not always similar. That's a good way of putting it. But, when I say I lead a conservative lifestyle, I live by my principles. I'm not, imposing my will on people. If I lead a good example, I'm hoping that people will follow it, but I'm not a dictator. I don't want to dictate, people, you have to think and agree like me. But if I set an example, maybe someone will be like, oh, that's a great way to live, about, believing these ideas, being healthy, being conscious about my surroundings. Like, I'm very, conservation minded. I like to go outdoors. I hunt and fish and do this. And it stems from my being conservative, because I think there's some overlap between the two words. You want to conserve, wisely manage things, and conservatives like to preserve good traditions, good things, and keep those moving forward. So there's a lot of overlap between those two philosophies. And so, as we live as a conservative, it's not something you can just take on temporarily as an identity and then shed it, for political expediency. And we do see some people, unfortunately, falling into this camp, where conservatism means, following individuals. Like, if you put your trust in a politician, I'm not going to single out any politician. This can happen. Cult of personality can happen to former presidents, senators, current senators, congressmen, everyone.
I
Politicians
don't
always
think
attract a
so.
cult of
What I
personality,
think
especially on the right and on the left too. But
happens
as you were
is
saying earlier, that some people say that they
Republican
define
people
conservatism
interchange
on
conservative and
like
Republican.
Trumpism,
Trump
or on
identified as
Trump as a
Republican,
metric,
so they
but they
thought
don't know
Trump.
that
And you know
conservatism
what? I'll throw in
predates
even
Trump.
Christian. Some people
And
think
he has
Republican,
pretty
conservative,
conservatively for the
Christian.
most part. There are some
Trump
things
are all
where
they see
he
equal
hasn't
signs
governed
with these
conservatively.
things. When
I
some
don't
of us
know
who are
if
a
he
little bit
calls himself a
more,
conservative.
who
I don't recall ever
I guess
hearing
know a little bit
or
more,
him
who are more in
declaring
it,
that he's a
can see that
conservative
they're
per
all
se.
very different things. There are some very similar, like there's a Venn diagram, which Kamala Harris loves, but there's a Venn diagram, but it's not a circle.
Yes,
it's not just one big circle. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh.
yes.
And right now, that's what we need. The bar is pretty low.
No, so yeah, there are a lot of areas of overlap, a lot of parallels, but there are areas where they dissect and are similar. But I happen to be both because I don't think I've ever voted Democrat. I actually I wrote in a Democrat for sheriff recently because my existing sheriff is extremely far to the left, and at least this Democrat was like a throw criminals in jail type Democrat. So I was like, okay, I'll write him in.
And that's very true. That's one thing you can say. Like, I personally also think Republican equals conservative. I think a lot of times it does, but you will never see, like, Democrat, you'll never see conservative in Democrat.
But I also identify as conservative because, again, there's a lot of overlap between the two. And I think as a party, the Republican Party has manifested generally in conservatism has and can be found there. You're not going to find conservatism in Democrat Party circles today, for sure.
So another question I want to ask kind of about, so we're talking about like what exactly is conservatism. Well, and I want to say this, like, if you're listening, I'm not one of those people that's I don't gatekeep Republican, conservative.
No, in the past,
you identify however you feel as if you identify. I'm not going to tell you you're not. I think there are objective, there's some objective things that align with these type of ideas. So, that's between you and God. So I don't want to make anyone feel like I'm trying to gatekeep, like, because I don't think that's necessary. And like, you vote for whoever, and I've said this on the podcast before and I'll say it again, you vote your values. Vote for whoever you think is best, represents your values. And whether that's Republican, Democrat, Libertarian, a write-in, your mom, Mickey Mouse gets votes every year. Like, if you think those people represent your values, that's who you should vote for. So at first I want to say that. And the next thing I kind of want to say, or like ask you a little bit, and we probably should wrap up soon, but I guess I kind of just want to have a conversation about when we are trying to talk to people who don't necessarily agree with us politically, who are just kind of like in the middle or don't really know, what are some things that we can, like, what are some common conversations we can have to, I don't necessarily say persuade your friends, but I guess, for lack of a better word, persuade your friends to kind of agree with you. Like, what are some things that you think we can say with them? Specifically women, just because it's a women podcast. And I do, like, my heart, sorry, really quick, I'm going to get on my soapbox for 5 seconds. My heart really is for more women to be more involved, not necessarily involved, but like care more about conservative politics. I think that just watching around me, like even on Twitter, sometimes I'm like, and I have to realize that Twitter is not real life, but I'm like looking around, like all of these girls. Okay, she used to be a really like prominent conservative influencer. Now she like hates the right. Oh wow, she's same thing. And I hate that. Like my heart breaks thinking about that. So I really do want us as in me and everybody listening, I want us to just be like good examples of conservatives so we can have our conversation with our friends. Because we're just seeing such I guess hostility. We're seeing so many things that like and I always say part of the problem is we have these people who are supposed to be conservative influencer leaders that are like the top of the charts. They go viral, their tweets are going viral, and they're just saying such inflammatory things that don't really help our cause, that the rest of us, we're like, wait, no, we all don't think that way. We just want to talk about the facts. Like, what I really, really like about this entire conversation, especially from your side, you have literally just said facts. Like, you have not said, and this person is a terrible person and they're just going to die. You haven't said anything. You've just given facts. And yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You don't need, no, not at all. You can make fun of people. I think that's always better, like killing them with kindness, softly, rhetorically speaking, of course. But no, we do have a problem, and I've seen I don't know how many cycles now, election cycles or just seasons of politics. and you always have like the shiny, bright new person, or you have the influencer of the season, or something of that nature. And how I've been able to have like long-standing permanence. I wouldn't say like people know I'm a thought leader, sure, maybe I don't know, but I know a lot of people. People know me because of just long-standing relationships and um, you know, kind of fostering and coming together with people I've
For sure.
tried to build up across over a decade and make meaningful friendships and relationships with people, business or otherwise. And just having some, kinship with people. I've always noticed that, when you're an activist, you have to do grassroots. You're going to work with people. You're going to meet all these people. If you're working in radio, you're going to meet people. You work in the policy side. My thing has always been about networking, communications primarily. Working in comms and policy and doing an intersection of both now. You have to have good people skills. You have to know you're going to meet a lot of people. You're going to want to remember people you met who are impressionable and good and important. I try to remember everyone. If I had an uncomfortable experience meeting someone, I'm like, I want to forget this. Meeting happened. Things that sort, or the people who want to like talk your ear off because they're like, oh, you work here, you can do this like favor for me. And I'm like, I don't know you. I really can't do this for you. That type. The pushovers, they are far and few between, especially these days. But no, I think it's just the problem the right has is, since we all are so individualistic, there is no real central thing or person or figure that we can really coalesce behind. Maybe it'll happen electorally again, with the former president. I think temporarily people will see like, ends justify the means thing. We would be better off overall, even if you don't like certain things of Trump. So people latch onto him at least electorally. But we don't really have a single cohesive leader. We've always had different thought leaders across the movement. It changes, it ebbs and flows. I really can't point to who's a leader today. Hard to pinpoint because they're little factions. You have this new right contingent, which is not really the majority, but they're very loud. Then you have like traditional conservatives who align with libertarians and kind of center right people, and I think we're still the majority. And then you have like the never Trumpers who kind of work with progressives. They're even smaller than I would say the new right is, and they're not as influential. They're not really Republicans and conservatives. The never Trumpers, I think. I haven't seen any inclination. Like, they're voting for Democrats, so I don't see how that's a benefit to conservatism as a whole or even to Republican politics. So you can kind of, I guess there's like three spheres. I don't know, two more prominently. You have traditional conservatism facing off with this kind of newer right populist kind of thinking. And I don't see economically, I'm a little worried about the new right, where they're adopting these kind of like anti-free market platitudes, and they support like making unionization compulsory with education. Employment. I'm very skeptical of that. I still think you can hold those opinions. I still support right to work. I think right to work is still a very good policy. People gravitate to states with right to work policies because you have more freedom, you can make more money. You're not going to be coaxed and forced into work arrangements you don't like. And we start to see a little splintering with people kind of challenging conventional economic stuff because they're like, well, we can't do this. We can't touch entitlement spending. We can't do this. We may lose, people that we've been working with. And I really don't think that's you asked me also about like areas that you can have spillover or kind of crossover with people. I don't think borrowing policies of the left, saying you're economically progressive and socially conservative, that's not a winning faction. That's never really been economically progressive, socially conservative. I've always seen it where it's like, for me, I'm of course full spectrum conservative. I'm economically and socially conservative. Very personally too. I don't focus on the social issues as much for my policy work, but anytime there's overlap, relating to energy and environment, sometimes I will weigh in, but I still very much, privately care about things, and I follow the pro-life accounts and all that, on my own personal time, and all that. So I still am very attuned to that because I did a lot in social conservatism in my early start. But I haven't moved away from that position. I just don't focus on it as much, but still very supportive, of course. And when you have at least, largely fully socially conservative, largely fully economically conservative, and where the two can meet, in the middle and get together, that's what succeeds. But when you adopt progressive, and I don't get this whole thing about, personally speaking, this is for me, not speaking on anyone I work for or anything, the economically conservative, socially liberal doesn't really bring over that many people too, but those people can be swayable. For on the economic side, like I have some friends who may be more socially liberal, libertarian, on the social stuff, but on economics and environment, we agree like 100%. So they can like say, well, we may not agree, on the social positions, but we're in agreement here. We distrust government. And I would say the couple of issues that you can get the left on or middle on board with conservatism. One thing that I've talked about, and I think originally how we connected over, was the fight to protect independent contracting and freelancing. You have nearly 70 million people. I think I've seen estimates recently, 64 million to 72 million, as high as 70 million. A good chunk of the workforce, almost half of the workforce, and by 2027, half the workforce will engage in some sort of freelancing work, part-time, full-time, occasional. And I have met, believe it or not, the most outspoken defenders of freelancers that I've come across on social media, all Democrats or formerly Biden voters. And they don't have a home at their party anymore. Now they're one-issue voters voting to protect freelancing. The Republican Party sadly has not capitalized on that. Groups like my employer, the Independent Women's Forum, has done that. We've worked with people across the party lines on different issues, protecting women in sports, protecting Title IX. But it's like the party hasn't recognized that issue can galvanize people because it's small business, it's the individual, it's, your freedoms being taken away from you, and the government saying, well, you're an employee because we said so, or you are in this type of arrangement, therefore you're easy, or you're being exploited by your clients, but you're in the position to negotiate your contracts, and you're not exploited by the people who employ you and pay you to do different contract work. Like I've had several clients at one time, and I was never exploited by the people I worked with. There were clients I had early on in my freelancing journey I didn't like, and I just stopped doing the contract work, or it was a short-term contract. We had good rapport, everything was great, but it was just a short season of working together. Or I had contract where I'm like, I need to get out of this, like terrible. Very early on, you'll take on anything because that's just what you're given. But I think fight to protect freelancing definitely is something people do not pay attention to. And I've had a lot of people come to me privately and at events, they're like, thank you for drawing attention to this, because I had no idea this was going on, from California starting this to now the federal government creating rules. So you talk about that economic issue, which is such a personal issue, the ability to determine your work output. And freelancing is a very socially conservative position too, if I may add that. I've argued that before because, we talk about women, giving women choices, and especially we're kind of alluding to this where...
Girl, same. That's the part that always gets me. I'm like, wait, but there's some of us who, like, what about the rest of us? Anyway,
there's something wrong with you.
Keep going.
When it could be that the guys haven't manned up to ask you out or gotten serious to want to get married. It's not always the women's fault, of course. Like we're the ones who've just spoiled everything. It takes two to tango. Men have also done their fair share of damage too. So they're not angels. They can be... I'm not speaking for myself personally. I've led it, like I said, a pretty conservative lifestyle in my personal life. So I don't want to be held responsible for cultural malaise. I can't be. I didn't. No judgment to anyone, who's fallible. But I think it's just, they're saying that like women are when you have this thinking of but how freelancing is. So freelancing gives you the choice. And I can go into that. I actually think the next thing I'll talk about is how women can become together because we're multifarious. But freelancing allows women to say, like, let's say you get married, you want to set aside time to have a family, and you're financially stable. You go into freelance work or remote work where you're working remotely, because freelancing kind of has like, even now working as a W-2 employee and then part-time freelancer, not really much has changed for me. Like, sure, I get some healthcare, great, and some other things, work of employees, but I still have flexibility even as a traditional worker again, but still as a part-time freelancer. But when I was full-time freelancer, I had so much at my disposal where, and certain things, it was a little tough in the beginning, of course, and healthcare is a nightmare regardless if you're an employee or freelancer. But as a woman, because I was able to be financially stable and, go towards that path of not incurring debt, running my own business affairs, setting up my clients, doing this contract stuff, I feel a lot better prepared than I would have in my 20s, because like this insistence that, you have to be married by a certain deadline, that doesn't work for everyone. It's not in God's timing, or it's not in, the cards. You don't meet the right person at 25. The guys that I met at 25 were into the hookup culture. I didn't want to marry any of them. They were not interested in getting married or dating seriously. So why would I have to stop all my ambition, and rescue me on a white horse or whatever? Prince Charming to come rescue. Most of the guys can't afford horses these days. I'm sorry to say that. They can't. Don't expect them to sweep you up that. It's kind of a silly thing to think of, but I mean, you can be charmed, and men should be charming women, of course, these days, and go back to being chivalrous. But freelancing, because I'm kind of going on tangent with that, but freelancing is empowering because a woman who is career oriented, may want to become family oriented, can use that as a means to pause maybe work for a little bit, tend to the children. And if you're working at home, you can say, as long as I do my tasks, I can still be attentive to my family. So, and instead of just, let's say sometimes in a traditional office job, you're really constricted, you're stuck, or you have a maternity leave plan or something of that nature. Freelancing, when you do it by yourself and you have enough resources financially, you can set aside money for healthcare if you're not on your husband's healthcare or whatever.
For whatever reason, I assume more women did freelancing.
But most people who are freelancers actually do get healthcare through their spouses or significant others. That's what I remember talking about in my testimony recently, and putting it to written words. And so it's a really empowering way economically, and also can breed more family creation or more willingness of women to want to settle down when they have economic stability. Same with men too. Like, men do freelancing a little bit more than we do, but I think the numbers are a little bit over men, and I think it's becoming nearly 50-50. So women are getting into it more, but yeah, it's a good economic policy. It's a good pro-family policy too. And I think the more we encourage policies that get out of the way of how you work, it's going to be great. And women are going to be like, you know what? I can prioritize getting settled down, getting married, having a family, because I'm not stuck with these constrictive work requirements or arrangements or a bad boss or something of that nature. Or maybe I have a full-time job, but I really like my passion project on the side. I want to also do that on the side too, because, everything is expensive now with food and groceries. And I want to get more so to the point that we're probably running out of time. But in terms of, I think something culturally that can speak to women of the left, and we see this, with this red pill stuff that's coming about. I feel like it's the other side of radical feminism. Meaning very similar. And I think reminding that, a woman at a current stage in life is not stuck at that stage in life. And I've even talked to, I have friends who I don't know what their politics are, or maybe they lean a little to the left, and they're like, oh my gosh, I went down this rabbit hole of trad wifery, red pill stuff, and I'm like, this is nuts. I was like, we can have commonality. And I think either extreme, because these are suburban women who are happily married, or these are suburban or city living women who want to get married too. They may be single. And it's not because I'm just talking to my female friends. I have guy friends who struggle to date too, but I was asking friends, I'm like, well, is my reason being single, is it because of my fault? And they're like, not necessarily. I don't think so, because DC is a tough area to date, which is notoriously true. But I think you have problems in any city, especially with social media and the dating app, too many choices, whatever, and all that. And that really breeds a lack of wanting to commit, because men have too many choices. They always want, I want perfect. And all that, and that's not healthy thinking. And sometimes women, we're too picky, so it could work to our detriment there. But I think the conversation about not limiting women to boxes, or putting us in boxes and saying we can be the girl boss, we can be the mother, we can be the homemaker, we can be whatever we want to be, we can be all of it. I think that also culturally can bring people together and reassure people that conservatives are not wanting to have these terrible, abusive marriages. That's not what traditional marriage is. You don't want to have, you have to have a partnership with your spouse and in your relationship. It shouldn't be one person domineering the other. Absolutely not. We have women who do that. We have men who do that. And that's not healthy. It's a partnership. Whatever denomination you lean, or things of that sort, centered around that. And, I think this kind of, I wouldn't call it toxic masculinity, but it's this red pilling, where these very insecure, maybe never did have success with women, are now saying well, to get back at women for getting educated, having all these opportunities, we have to shame you and say you're worthless after age 30 because you haven't hit this milestone. But it's well, you guys may have partaken in some of this stuff too, with this hookup culture. So I think women talking to each other and saying that, we don't believe in this extreme, you don't believe in this extreme. Let's come together and be like, let's be able to say that women can do it all. And be supported by wonderful, nurturing boyfriends, fiancés, husbands. Like, there are plenty of good men out there. I don't think this is a blight on all of men. Of course not. There's just crazy people who really do a disservice to men. And most people in real life are like, what is this big clowning, happening? But back to the points too. What else could bring people? I would say like conservation too. Caring about national parks, hunting and fishing, which are primary drivers of conservation, funding. I have a lot of conversations with people on the left, and they're like, yeah, I didn't know this, and this is cool, and oh, okay, we can still have industry and then also protect the environment. That is starting to become a little bit more of a crossover issue. I think even just supporting small businesses in general, like, well, and I actually, the best way, what is actually turning people maybe Republican for this election cycle, or perhaps, maybe they've come around, turned a new leaf. I think just people seeing how high inflation prices are on grocery bills, energy, that you really don't need anything special with that, except for like saying, okay, I'm going to lower taxes, I'm going to decrease government spending. I'm not going to pivot towards like a net zero future, because all this, decarbonization effort and net zero basically is producers taking on these demands and then passing down increased costs onto us, the consumer. So that's why we're seeing higher energy bills, food prices, because they want to move away from vilified carbon intensive goods and services to stuff that is not proven, or replacements that will exhaust more in energy and be more pricey to replicate or whatever. And so I think inflation, especially, just talking about grocery store prices, or like why you're paying more for basic goods, and shrinkflation. You're paying more and you're getting less too. I think that's still a problem as well. But just talking about the kitchen table issues, like that. But I think even fine tuning it down to, why is my grocery bill so high? Why is my gas price so high? Why is my utility bill so high? You're getting a lot of people who were formerly Biden voters, formerly Obama voters, maybe diehard Democrats, whatever, progressives. I've even seen some of them. I've even seen the issue of Israel turn people from college that I know who were kind of progressive leaning to be like, I had one acquaintance of mine declare to me, he's like a gay individual. He's like, I'm going to vote for Trump, like to smite my Democrat friends. And he's like gay, Asian, highly educated, grew up in the Bay Area, spent time in Hawaii. And the Israel October 7th turned him against the party, from my understanding. And he's just thought that like the Israel issue too is also a good way to, cross the divide too, because support for Israel is still very historically felt among both parties and all these different factions. So there's a lot you can play with, but like keeping it simple, freelancing, saying that women can have it all is very palatable, especially to women, suburban women, or women who might be like nominally conservative, but are being told you have to vote Democrat. The conservation component, just talking about why everything is so expensive.
Well, this was fantastic. Thank you so much. I want to add one thing that you said, to kind of wrap up because of everything we kind of talked about.
And that money's just flowing.
We were talking about feminism and red pill are kind of on the same same coin, different sides. So I also want to say like something that I have really tried to remember when having conversations with people, when just talking in general, is that most of us think that both sides are really crazy. My most liberal friend cannot, like, having conversation with her, she cannot get behind a lot of the super feminist things that, the ladies on The View saying that men are useless. Like, most liberal on the left Democrat women are not pro that either. So I think kind of just remembering like we have so much more in the middle than we think. It just feels that way because of Twitter, because of social media. But we have so much more in the middle when you go outside and touch grass. Like that's another thing that's so important, is just to it's I guess to really wrap it up, I think it's really a couple of things that we learn is like we really need to, if you want to be knowledgeable, you gotta read, you have got to learn, you gotta know like the definitions, what you're talking about, and then also you have to live life and you have to meet people and like just remember that everyone is a human being, and like know what your values are. I hope that's another thing too that you guys got out of this episode, is just kind of like making sure you know when you say you're a conservative, what exactly that means. And, you know, Gabriella said there isn't a true definition. And that's true. There isn't a true definition, but there are, like she said, there are just certain things. You said the three legs of the stool. Like, there are certain things you do kind of have to at least partially grasp. Okay, like you do have to partially grasp. But anyway, oh, is there anything else you wanted to add as we wrap up? Anything you're like, oh, I gotta say this one last thing? Oh, yes, please do. Ooh.
Yeah, I want to put a plug in for one of my new podcasts. I have two podcasts. If your listeners are curious about one of those topics, I think has crossover, conservation. Distributive conservation I've had for 6-7 years, and I talk about policy. Episodes are usually like 20 to 30 minutes tops.
Yes.
Including interviews. So I talked to some of the who's who in like energy.
Yes, I would love to have you on again soon, and maybe we can even have like more specialized episodes. And I'm honestly, we've had, hunting, do you know fishing, Christopher from Young?
So it's a non-political show. And I invite a lot of interesting people. We have a lot of episodes on the docket. So if your listeners are interested,
but he does environmental stuff.
Inspiring outdoor women.
Say that again.
That would be, it's called the Sportswoman Show, and I would highly recommend you check that out too. But I will send you all the social links, and I thank you, Mallory, for.
Anyway, we've had him on, and like before he's like had conversations with me, I really couldn't care less about the environment. Like, that was conservation. I was like, oh, who cares? It's just but like now, as I've listened to some of the things that he said, as I've like grown and matured, as I've also just thought about like, okay, I should care. This is a world, we should care about what's going on here. I have really become so much more fascinated. So I would love to have you on have like a specialized episode on that.
Yeah, I know.
And even on the outdoor stuff, because I'm not like, I'm probably the girliest girl you'll ever meet. So like that doesn't really. Okay, and that's where we differ. I don't want to get my hands dirty. But I like to hear other people's stories. Like, I listen to when Forrest Gallagher or whatever I see something he's on YouTube, I'm like, ooh, I want to hear what he has to say. I don't want to do it myself, but like, please tell me about it. So I'd love to even do some stuff like that. So I'll link all of her information. And then if someone do you have a way, like if someone's listening is like, I want to learn more about blah, blah, blah. Do you have an email like that you want to give out, or can I tag your Instagram? Okay. Oh, those things happen. Yeah, that.
Is perfect.
Okay, and I'll link all that to you guys. Thank you everyone so much for listening, and make sure you share this episode with your friends. Let us know, did you learn anything in this episode? And if you did learn something, let us know something that you learned, and if you like episodes like this, we'll get a little bit more into the politics of life, I guess you could say.
But just Instagram,
and then make sure you leave a comment, rate, review, subscribe.
You look at my work,
talk to us somehow. Just let me know what you think of the episode. And I hope you have a good day, night, evening, however, wherever you're listening. Bye.